Good evening and welcome to Colorado Decides, a joint production of Colorado Public Television, CBS 4, KOA News Radio, and the Colorado Sun. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Joining me is Sean Boyd, political specialist at CBS 4, and Jerry Bell, managing editor at KOA News Radio. Tonight, we continue our general election season looking at the major races on November's ballot. This debate will feature the major party candidates running to represent the 6th Congressional District. Joining us for the next 30 minutes are Mike Coffman, the Republican incumbent, and Jason Crow, the Democratic challenger. Okay, we have limited time, so let's get to it. Thank you very much for being here, gentlemen. Sean, why don't you start us off?
So some of the world's top scientists on climate change just issued a report that says unless we enact sweeping changes, we are going to start seeing the impacts of global warming in terms of food supply, wildfires, et cetera, by 2040. So how do you make these sweeping changes in a Trump administration? Mike, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm in a group in Congress, Climate Change Caucus. And so one of the issues I'm working with in the caucus is to say, how can the United States integrate trade policy with environmental policy? Because what we're doing oftentimes is we're raising our environmental standards, which I think we should, but in doing so, we're raising our costs and we're pushing jobs in manufacturing overseas to countries that don't have the same environmental standards, and we're importing those same goods back to the United States. And so I think that's a big question. How can we, first of all, do better, obviously, domestically, in terms of bringing our carbon footprint down, but how can we integrate that with trade? I do think we are projecting that there's going to be a significant increase in electric vehicles.
Right.
And then the question is how do you produce the energy to do that? I received an award for our renewable energy from the Wind Energy Coalition. And so I've been supportive of renewable energy, but also supportive of NREL, National Renewable Energy Research Lab, in terms of providing funding. Because what we don't want to do is have renewables subsidized indefinitely. And we want them to be cost competitive with conventional fuels.
Okay. Jason?
Sean, first off, thanks for having us here for this really important debate. We really appreciate the opportunity to have the discussion. You know, listen, climate change is happening. It's real. It's caused by human emissions. You know, I'm a father of young children. And like all parents, we view the world through the eyes of our kids. And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about the world that all of our children are going to inherit and the crises that you know, is represented by climate change. You know, my opponent has a 5% lifetime record by the League of Conservation Voters. 5%. That's turning his back on public lands, on the UN Climate Accord, at a time where we need to be doubling down, making investments in renewable energy, being a world leader, rejoining the Climate Accord. We are running rapidly on the opposite direction. We are not going to solve this issue with the same leadership that brought us here and got us into this mess.
So should you be elected, though, what would you do in this Trump administration to change this?
You know,
how would you work with the other side?
There's a huge economic component of this. You know, China and Europe are making large investments in renewable energy infrastructure. We aren't making those investments. So, you know, Donald Trump a year ago called for investments in transportation infrastructure. So how can we start making those investments that he has already called for so that we have the energy infrastructure that we need to distribute renewable energy and start moving towards cleaner renewable sources?
Well, first of all, the League of Conservation Voters is a partisan group, and you know that is an arm of the Democrat Party, and it's set up to have partisan individuals like Jason Crow use those fictitious numbers against Republicans, and so I think it's a wrong place to start.
Okay. Let's get to our next question, Jerry.
The 6th Congressional District, the most diverse district really that we have in Colorado. And so consequently, there are a lot of immigrants there, and there's a lot of concern about immigration policy. Through Democratic and Republican administrations, we haven't been able to come up with a comprehensive immigration policy. I'd like to find out where you guys stand on things like a wall on the southern border, deportations of people who've lived here for a long time who are paying taxes and haven't committed any crime, the remaining issue of DACA. Let's start with you, Jason Crow.
Yeah, so our immigration system is failed, right? We haven't had comprehensive immigration reform in this country since 1986. So we had the Sony Walkman and we had immigration reform, right? And only one of those things has changed. My opponent has served with a Democrat in the White House and Democrats in Congress, a Democrat in the White House and Republicans controlling Congress, and now a Republican in the White House and Republicans controlling Congress. His party has had 2 years of unified control, and it hasn't gotten done. So that tells me that we're not going to solve this issue with the same people that got us into this mess. We need to pass the DREAM Act, and we need to pass it now. I think that a wall is the wrong thing to do. $25 billion for a wall is a waste of taxpayer money, and it will not make our border safer. I'm for border security. I spent 2 deployments to Afghanistan along the Afghan-Pakistan border, so I know a thing or two about how to secure borders, and we're not going to do it with a $25 billion wall. And we need comprehensive immigration reform to provide a path to citizenship for folks that haven't committed violent crimes, that are here contributing to our country and our community, and that deserve a path forward. And it's not going to happen with the same leadership that got us into this mess.
Mike, what's your response on that?
Both parties have been wrong. When the Democrats controlled Congress, both houses of Congress with supermajorities and had the White House, they did nothing on immigration. The Republicans say that we will take a step-by-step process and never take the first step. I'm in a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats that have come together to try to bridge the partisan divide in Washington, D.C., and we've come up with a plan. I think one of the things that we are going to force is reforming the process that would allow a bill with 290 co-sponsors to come to the floor. Right now we have a bill to lift the discriminatory country cap for Asian Indians on the H-1B visa program, and it has 329 co-sponsors and can't get a vote because one person is opposed to it, determined in the Judiciary Committee. We believe that we can change that. We can force those changes in the next Congress. But I believe we have to secure our borders. It's not a wall from coast to coast. It is barriers replacing existing barriers. It is sensors and drones in areas where a wall is not feasible. And it's a plus of the Border Patrol. But I do believe that we have to be realistic and that we have a lot of people that have been in this country for a long time that haven't violated laws other than immigration laws. And I think we ought to give them a window of opportunity before we implement something like an E-Verify program to come out of the shadows and have a legalized status akin to a non-immigrant work permit for the young people who were taken to this country illegally as children that are under the DACA system, 800,000 today. They ought to have a path to citizenship, an earned path to citizenship based on education, based on work history, based on military service. And for those for temporary protected status, we ought to give them a regular immigrant status too. They've been in this country for a very long time legally, and the administration is looking at not renewing that status. And so I'm working with members of Congress across the aisle to try and get their status extended and have a permanent solution.
And
Mike,
Jerry,
Go
I'll
ahead.
say, the congressman's been saying the same thing for years, and it just isn't getting done, right? And he's also talking out of both sides of his mouth. Just a few months ago, a recording captured the congressman behind closed doors talking to his private supporters, saying that he's to the right of the Trump administration on DACA, saying that TPS is a bad idea. These are the things that he's saying to one group, and then he comes out and says another. We have to have consistency, and we have to have real leadership that's going to do the same thing back in the district that they're doing in Washington, and actually gets this done. It has to get done.
TPS is a bad idea. I mean, TPS was founded on the premise that it was passed in 1990 that people from countries that had natural disasters or civil emergencies could in fact come to the United States and remain temporarily. Well, nobody ever went home. The El Salvadorian community in this congressional district has been here since, I think, 2001, when there was a series of very devastating earthquakes in El Salvador. Now, both administrations from both parties look the other way. and renewed the status year after year. And this administration doesn't want to do that, and I'm fighting them to get that done. So there are a little over 400,000 currently under TPS. What I want to do is yes, suspend the program in the future, but give them a regular immigrant status that would give them a path to citizenship. Then on the question of DACA that was Jason raised, yes, I was in a bipartisan working group. We came up with a number of 1.1 million. The current 800,000 in DACA, we plussed it up based on adjusting the age to accommodate more people to come into the system. The president came out with 1.8 million. He plussed his up in terms of age of eligibility, but he also calculates all those who were eligible who didn't apply for the program in the first place. I support that number now, but yes, that number is more generous than anybody's come up with in Congress. Now, to what extent the president is actually for it, we can debate that.
I think that's the question, if I can follow up, is that we hear both Democrats and Republicans saying they want to do something on DACA, yet push come to shove, it doesn't get done. And so the question, Mike, is if it's not happening and it's because you have a president that is not really willing to go there, why wouldn't voters want to put somebody else in there and put more pressure on?
Well, Democrat leadership also walked from the table. And the reason why, the problem is that we had a deadline, we thought we had a deadline on DACA of March of last year. I can remember going to St. Michael's Catholic Church, a Hispanic Catholic Church, and doing a town meeting in Spanish after the service on a Sunday, where the anxiety for those young people in DACA, because they was worried if there wasn't a solution, that they were going to be deported. But then what happened is we had several court cases in federal court intervene and say, no, the president doesn't have the ability to suspend the program. And so now it's going to, eventually it will wind its way to the Supreme Court. When they took out that deadline, unfortunately they took out the pressure from Congress. I have signed a discharge petition to bring a bill to the floor. Finally, there was a bill to the floor, but it didn't have bipartisan support. And so, again, I think one of the things we've done a reform agenda, my group called Problem Solvers, bipartisan group, is to fundamentally change the rules in Congress to allow more bipartisanship. There are bipartisan consensus on all these immigration issues, but I think the leadership on both sides of the aisle wants to use immigration as political leverage, and that's wrong.
Yeah, Jerry, let me answer your
Just
question.
a quick response, and let's get going.
Yeah, but the congressman likes to talk about the petitions and technicalities and voting rules and procedures. We have seen every iteration, and we've been talking about this for far too long. The only common denominator is the people that we keep on sending back to Washington to do this, the career politicians that have failed us and failed the community. And there's no greater case than right now in this issue for a new generation of leadership to go to Washington and actually roll up their sleeves and get it done.
Okay.
The first bill I introduced in the Congress of the United States
reaction.
was a bipartisan bill with Congressman Gutierrez, a Democrat from Illinois, and it was called the Bridge Act, and it was a 3-year extension of the protections of DACA to send us in January, before the president was ever sworn in, to send a signal to him about how important this issue is.
And it didn't get done.
Sean.
So let's switch gears here. If Democrats do, in fact, take control of the House and they bring impeachment proceedings against Judge Kavanaugh and/or President Trump, would you support that? Who's first? Mike? You're now first. I don't even lost track.
Would I support that? We have to see what the evidence is. I mean, I'd be surprised. I think that the issue of Judge Kavanaugh has been fairly litigated. I'm very disappointed, though. I think the Republicans in the Senate made a mistake by not making that FBI report public to where the American people can see it prior to the vote. I think that was a mistake. So we're taking the word of the senators that in fact there was no additional information there. We have to wait and see where the Mueller investigation goes as to whether or not it justifies impeachment.
If it finds
proceedings.
collusion between the Trump administration and Russia, would you support
If it's a
impeachment?
violation of law, if it's a violation
You would
of law.
then support it.
Well, with respect
Jason?
to the now Justice Kavanaugh, I came out, after I reviewed his record and saw what he stood for after he was nominated, and I said he wasn't the right choice for America. Whether you're talking about the issue of gun violence in America, women's health and reproductive rights, environmental protections, he takes this court drastically to the right, and he is a step back in time for this country, in my view. This process was bungled from the very beginning. The process was not followed. We did not go through a due diligence that I thought was appropriate for a lifetime appointment in the Supreme Court. And what's also very important to say is that I believe Dr. Ford, right? And I think the starting point has to be to believe women. I believe her testimony. I found it compelling. I found it deeply troubling. And yet the Senate still crammed through the appointment.
But Democrats are talking about impeachment proceedings. Would you support impeachment?
Right now, I wouldn't, right? And I
Okay.
have to see the facts. I'm somebody who has taken numerous oaths
But I'm
throughout my life to defend the rule of law and due process. So we have to see facts, but we also have to have leadership right now that's going to unite our country and move us forward.
On President Trump, though, if the Mueller investigation comes back and finds collusion, you would support impeachment?
I would also have to see the facts.
Okay.
I'm not going to Washington with a partisan agenda.
Okay.
Right? I don't want any president to fail, right? Because we're talking about the president of the United States, right? And if a president fails, the country will suffer as a result of it. I'm going to hold this administration accountable. We have to defend the rule of law, and we have to insulate the Mueller investigation from political influence so we can get the facts.
Can I say one thing about
A quick reaction.
Well, just I think the president was absolutely wrong at one of his rallies to denigrate the woman that stepped forward. And I think that was a big mistake. I supported the Violence Against Women Act on the Armed Services Committee. I worked hard to try and end sexual assaults in our military through training requirements, through special victims advocates, and through the implementation of special prosecutors on sexual assault cases.
Gentlemen, let's get to the next question. Our friends at ARP send this next one. They want to find out how you will work to strengthen Social Security for current and future generations. Jason, we'll start with you.
Yeah, Dominic, the starting point has to be that's the people's money, right? People have paid into that system. They have earned that money over a lifetime of hard work, and they deserve to have that money when they retire for a retirement of dignity, right? My opponent has called that system a Ponzi scheme, and I think that's reflective of his view. I deeply disagree with that characterization. That's people's hard-earned money. So it's time that we lift the wage cap so we can firm up that system and give it the solvency that it deserves, and that we fight against issues like chained CPI that are going to make it harder and harder for people to pay their living expenses and to live in a community with increased cost of living.
Mike.
I'm very much. I strongly believe we made a commitment to the seniors on Social Security. We backed that commitment that if there's a problem with the solvency of the fund, it will come from the general fund, which will further aggravate the debt. But we made that commitment. One important bill that I voted against was that Social Security is divided into two separate funds. One is a disability fund, and the other one is the one for seniors. And the disability fund was going insolvent. And what I argued is that let's use this as an opportunity to reform our disability program. And instead, what Congress did, and I voted against, was to allocate a greater percentage of the payroll tax that's dedicated to Social Security from seniors to shore up the disability program, further aggravating the solvency of the program for seniors. And so I think Congress has to have much more respect for this program, and I was right to vote no on that bill.
The bottom line, Dominic, is Congressman Coffman wants to cut benefits. Right? He supported the Trump tax bill this past December, which blew a hole in our federal deficit, was a giveaway to the top 1% and to our largest corporations, most of whom have funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to his campaign. And the next step for his party is they're going to cut Medicare, they're going to cut Medicaid, and they're going to cut Social Security. And I don't want to let that happen.
A quick response?
No plan to do any of that. Okay. Number one, and number two, on the There was so much there. Let me just talk about the tax reform for a minute, because I think it was important to this economy. And I get it that Jason Crow wants to raise taxes on the American people. I understand that. But the fact is that we were losing jobs, that U.S. corporations were moving overseas as a result of having the 35% tax rate. And the fact is that we were alone in the industrialized world in taxing overseas earnings, paying to the host country, and then paying again to coming here. And so we've ended that practice, lower the rate to 21%, but also for individuals. The average, let's take $76,000 household income in Aurora, Colorado. Doubling the standard deduction to $24,000 that's not taxed. Increasing the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000, and lowering the individual rate from 15% to 13%. That's crumbs to Jason, a big-time attorney who represents some pretty unsavory individuals. But anyway, I won't go into that right now.
Let's keep going. We're running out of time, so I'm going to get Jerry in here for another question.
I want to ask you kind of more of an open-ended question, which is this. We're at the midterm elections. Many people regard this as a referendum on the current administration, the Trump administration. We're 2 years in now. I'd like you to give me a grade both on style and substance. I'll start with you, Mike.
I think I would give a B on substance. Well, maybe B, that's kind of hard, maybe a C. On substance, I think I differ on immigration. I differ on trade. I think fair trade is great, but when you get into protectionism, that's wrong. I think that the tone, I'd give him an F, absolutely an F on the tone. I think it's wrong. I think that there's a certain dignity to the office of the presidency of the United States. I served in the Army and the Marine Corps, non-commissioned officer in the Army, field grade officer in the Marine Corps, and there was always an expectation every time I got promoted for how I would conduct myself. And I think that it ought to be the same for the President of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief, and he ought to conduct himself accordingly.
Jason?
Jerry, I think this administration is failing across the board, right? And just a few weeks ago, Congressman Coffman said, you know, he disagrees with the tone of this president, but feels like he's doing a lot of great things. You know, the tone is deeply troubling. You know, his Twitter feed and the message that he sends to our allies and our partners across the world, the message that he sends to our diverse communities, and the message of the other that he constantly sends to the country is tearing this country apart. At the same time, we're gutting environmental protections. We're not addressing climate change. We're not addressing the gun violence issue. For the first time since the Affordable Care Act was passed, there are now fewer people on the health care rolls than there were before the Affordable Care Act was passed. People are going bankrupt. People are dying because they're not getting the care they need. We have families in our community, in our district, who are being torn apart because they're being deported across the board. The people of our community need help. They need leadership that's going to actually hold this administration accountable, not be a rubber stamp.
Okay. Gentlemen, we were very close to our closing statement, so let's get a quick answer question from Sean.
So I'm just going to hit on the gist of the ads that both of you have running right now. Your ads tie Mike to President Trump. So I wanted to ask you, besides the tax cut, what one vote would you have taken differently that Mike has taken? And we need to keep these answers to like 30 seconds. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, it's hard to decide because there are so many. He has a 96% voting record with this administration, the highest of any elected representative in the state. But you know, in addition to the massive shift of wealth to the top 1% and the large corporations that the Trump tax bill includes, Congressman Coffman voted for that bill, which included a provision to remove the individual mandate from the Affordable Care Act. The purpose of removing that provision is to blow up and to sabotage the health care system, and it's going to make it more expensive for the folks in Colorado.
Okay, so the tax cut is the one main vote. And Mike, for you, you've talked a lot about him working for Holland and Hart, and yet this is a law firm that your campaign is hired to do work for you. You've taken campaign donations from this firm, so how it seems kind of hypocritical.
You know, I think that the fact is that Jason was handpicked by the Democratic establishment in Washington, D.C. Seth Moulton, liberal Democrat out of Massachusetts, was tasked with picking combat veterans with no voting record in swing districts, and he reached out to Jason, and Jason was one of those candidates that were picked for a very good reason, because he has never stood up to his party on a single issue, and he will be a reliable vote. And the fact is that
I'm gonna cut us there, Mike. So we're gonna go to our closing statements. We're gonna run out of time, and we give you an opportunity for a minute each. So we have told each of our candidates they have 1 minute each for a closing statement. We flip a coin before the debate to determine the order. Mike, you go first for your 1 minute closing statement.
Thank you. I'm a Marine Corps combat veteran and a former small business owner. In Congress, I have been a voice, an independent voice for this district. I've worked with both the Obama administration and the Trump administration when I thought that they were right. And I've spoken out against both of them when I thought that they were wrong. Regardless of who's in charge in Congress, there's simply too much power in too few hands with too little getting done for the American people. I'm in a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats that have come together to try and bridge the partisan divide in Washington, D.C. Together, we've come up with bipartisan bills to reform our healthcare system, to fix our immigration system, and to improve our infrastructure. Last month, we introduced a bipartisan reform agenda that would require bipartisan compromises like ours to come to the floor for a vote. I would, today, I would really appreciate your vote so that I can continue to be that independent voice that this district needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Jason, your 1 minute closing statement.
Thank you. 2 years ago, my wife and I weren't planning to run for Congress, but we have been so deeply moved by what's going on in our country and our community that we decided to step up again and to serve our country again. I've never run for anything before. I grew up in a working class family. I worked in construction to put my way through college. I served this country as an Army Ranger during 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now my wife and I have 2 young children, a 5-year-old and 8-year-old. And like most parents, we view the world through the eyes of our children. Our country has a very important choice to make in 30 days. Will we elect the same career politicians that have brought us the dysfunction that we see today? Or will we go with the new generation of leadership who are standing up across the country to say what is happening in this country is not okay, we are better than this, we can and will move forward. My name is Jason Crow, and I humbly ask for your support so I can be a part of that new generation of leadership that will move us forward again together. Thank you.
Jason, thank you. That is all the time we have for our debate featuring the major party candidates running to represent the 6th Congressional District. I'd like to thank our candidates, Mike Coffman and Jason Crow. I'd also thank my fellow panelists, Sean Boyd and Jerry Bell. If you'd like to find out more information about any of this year's general election issues and races, please visit our websites, cpt12.org, cbsdenver.com, koanewsradio.com, and coloradosun.com. For everybody here at Colorado Public Television, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.